Hi, today we're going to talk about white lies and the question of is there such a thing as a white lie or a lie that is harmless? So, obviously, lying is part of the Ten Commandments, says thou shalt not lie. If you ask someone just randomly to give you three of the Ten Commandments, the odds are that lying would be one of the first ones they would mention. It's one that's pretty easy to remember. It's one that we're reminded of often, and it's one that our culture is still against. Our culture in general does not like lying. If you just turn on TV and watch primetime television, whether it's news or dramas or whatever, when people lie, there's struggle and there's trouble for those individuals. So it's something that our culture still doesn't like. But the question of is there a such thing as a harmless lie? So if we look at Proverbs 12:22, it says that lying is an abomination to God. So an abomination is something that causes disgust or hatred. So it's easy to say that God hates lying or is disgusted by our lying. So I would appeal to you that no, there is not a such thing as a white lie. If we look at Matthew 26:69 to 75, we won't read the whole thing, but essentially it's probably the most famous lie in all of Scripture, maybe arguably in all of history. Peter denies Jesus 3 times when Jesus is about to be killed, and Peter is discovered by a few of the people in the courtyard where he is. They say, "You were with him, you were with Jesus," and he says, "No, I don't." And if we pick it up in verse 74, it says, "Then he," meaning Peter, "then he began to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, 'I do not know the man.' And immediately the rooster crowed, and Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, 'And for the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times.' And he went out and wept bitterly." So Peter realizes his sin. Peter realizes that he has denied the Lord. Peter realizes that he has lied in order to save himself. So is that a white lie? It seems harmless. It kept him alive to do great things for the kingdom. And thousands of people came to faith in the early church because of Peter and his testimony. But does that mean that Peter was right to lie? No. And Jesus essentially rebukes him later on towards the end of Jesus' ministry before his ascension back into heaven. And he asked Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times. And Peter says, "Yes, Lord." So this seemingly harmless lie that kept Peter alive and great things happened is still a sin. It still is detestable to God. It still does not glorify God. And the ends do not justify the means. However, I would argue that this is not the same as David in 1 Samuel or Rahab hiding the Israelite spies when they both lie to save their people, to save the Israelites or to save David's army. I would argue it's not the same, one, because God does not rebuke them, and two, it seems to be a different working there. However, it's possible that in God's justice, he was still disgusted by that lie and will still judge them for that lie. Maybe David should have had faith that if he told the king of the Philistines what he was actually doing when he was raiding enemies of the Philistines instead of enemies of Israel, maybe he should have trusted God and glorified God more in placing his faith in him instead of taking it into his own hands. And I don't know what to do with that, and that's a question for God and in his justice. And this is also not the same as trying to trick someone into getting them to a surprise party. A lie is something that you tell to gain something or to not get something that's bad. So I would argue that it's not the same. But again, in 1 Samuel, what we see, or Rahab with the spies, that's for God to decide. But in general, I would say that no, there is no such thing as a white lie, and that's because ultimately, as it says in Proverbs 12:22, God detests lying, and therefore when you tell a lie of any kind, it is something that God detests and does not ultimately glorify him. Thank you very much. Have a great week.